mainly through television. Television will obviously exist, but the vast majority of the world will experience the internet for the first time on these. And this is going to have a profound impact and change in how we actually export culture from the United States out. And it's not, I'm not just saying we export culture like Hot Tub Time Machine, the movie, right? That's bullshit, right? It's meaningless entertainment for the sake of meaningless entertainment. So what you really want to do is, if you want to give people the power to actually make content, it's actually the craft. It's actually the things that you don't think is highbrow that is going to have a bigger impact on society. Because for the last 50 years, when it comes to mass media, we were actually going to be witnessing a change in who decides what is quality. Quality is no longer a bunch of people in a studio willing to actually put together money and saying, we're going to actually go and fund a $100 million movie that we think might make a profit and have copyright and restrictions that guarantee us some return. That model no longer works. It's not about putting money up front first and then figuring out how to extract them from the commons later. Because that's how copyright is actually created today. It's about lifetime plus 90 years of copyright enforcement in order for me to get as much money out of the system. What the internet is doing is it's turning that model upside down by saying we don't know what quality is, but we can talk meritocratically about what is quality. And quality is the enjoyment people have, whether it's misspelled captions on cats, or if it's people's videos where they get kicked in the nuts, or if it's a rage comic that is very poorly drawn, right? That's not what quality content seems like to a lot of people, yet that's what we as society is beginning to believe is quality content. And what's happening is that you might not be able to watch a 2-hour video on this phone, but you can certainly scroll through a bunch of websites and be really entertained by the fact that we are now a participant in the culture that we create. That if we actually go in and we actually are able to share a little bit about ourselves, we're actually creating our version of Seinfeld. Like Rage Comics is like today's Seinfeld. It's about the most mundane shit. Like I went to class and the teacher gave me an assignment and said it's due in a week and it's a 600-page book, aside. Like it's not that funny, except we all have had that experience, and the commonality of our experience is what drives internet culture and memes. And unfortunately, this isn't blockbuster TV material. It isn't something the studios can spend $100 million on. So while they ratchet up their copyrights, we start to see a disconnect between how intellectual property started. Intellectual property as a concept did not come from the idea that you can treat a piece of idea like you could a microphone. That intellectual property should be created so that people have a limited incentive that expires at some point, and that incentive causes people to put their ideas forth into the commons. And so when intellectual property was first invented as an idea, and it was passed into legislation, copyrights and patents were given a 14-year limited right. While patents have stayed at 14 to 21 years, copyrights have gone from that to 90 plus, a lifetime plus 90 years. For some reason, we have said patents, the idea of publishing an idea into a business form or into a practical form is actually protectable only for 14 years. If you create a piece of content, it effectively, for us, is forever. In other words, Star Wars will never be in the public domain as far as we are concerned, because we will be dead by then. I don't know how that happened. I don't know where it went from intellectual property as an idea and an incentive to put things into the commons versus let's make sure people get their money back for Hot Tub Time Machine. And I'm not exactly sure how anyone believes that that's really a good thing for society, except I think we got into this trap called intellectual property. The words that you use to describe it is really making people think about ideas as if it were physical property. No one owns a meme. Everyone owns a meme, right? The idea of a meme itself is that it is an idea that is transmitted from person to person. So the nature of creating a meme says that if you cannot transmit it from person to person, in other words, if more people who are unassociated are not involved in the transmission of a meme, then it is by definition not a meme. And that's some of the challenges that we run into, is that if you cannot pass an idea virally, it is of no value. Therefore, the value of where memes come in actually falls on companies like us, whose job is to distribute the content. And that's why actually we are able to make a business, is that unfortunately, a lot of the content in memes are replaceable. They're commodity. So you saw when Jonathan Zafrain talked about the privilege denying dude, right? They used a stock photo, and the stock photo company objected to it. And so somebody else stepped in and said, I'll be that guy. The funny thing is, that dude looked nothing like the original guy in the stock photo. Yet the idea of that meme still worked, that macro still worked, because we realized that content at many levels is a complete commodity. If you look at Keyboard Cat the meme, Fatso the video languished in obscurity for a very long period of time. And when that language, like no one really cared about that video until this guy named Brad O'Farrell showed up out of nowhere and actually started splicing two copyrighted material together to form something totally transformative. Yet, Brad gets very little recognition versus the original Keyboard Cat, because biologically we are wired to look at the piece of content and say, aha, I identify with that piece of content, therefore that piece of content and the representation of that cat is the celebrity. Scumbag Steve, the meme, has virtually nothing to do with Blake Boston, the person. But if you walk around today, you will see that Blake Boston is the guy who's the celebrity, yet he had no meritable experience or part of that process. Because we are biologically wired to look at the image and say, I identify with a person in that image. It is the epitome of what a celebrity is. Because you are seen in front of millions of people, you are now the famous person, regardless of whether you have anything to do with the meritable distribution of that content. And so, whereas internet culture becomes more mainstream, we are seeing ourselves somewhat devolve back into the way popular culture works, which is the guy I see on television or the guy I see in a meme on Reddit is the guy that I identify with, and therefore that person is a celebrity. As much as we talk about appreciating content creators, I believe we're actually hardwired to do the opposite. Whereas we identify with the media and not the creator itself. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that we as people who are part of internet culture need to understand, that we sometimes have to fight biology and fight the way we think about memes. Because if you want to actually give credit to the people who created the memes, sometimes it's impossible to find. Sometimes it's very difficult to identify. But you have to understand that we have to build systems, not just have a feeling about it, but we have to build systems for recognizing people and giving credit where it's due. So I'm more than happy to take questions at this point. Not you. You I'll talk to later.
Why are you raping the internet, sir? Why? You are a criminal. Why are you escaping justice right now?
Yes.
You're a criminal.
So like, you're talking about Star Wars, so people may be like splicing two pieces of copyrighted content together.
That's right.
How do you see preserving a space for commercial, professional level content being made so that it still exists for people to splice other communities? You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
How do you protect the space for professional commercial content?
Yeah.
That still has to exist.
So I think it's very clear that commercial.
I just want them to gone.
So I'll repeat the question. It's a very, very good question. How do you allow original content creators in a world where remixes are free and open and available? How do you allow them to actually succeed? And the answer is actually, if you look at how piracy is being affecting the sales and things like that, the answer is actually very clear. The people who are able to remix content are actually able to make the original piece more prominent. The movie Downfall, right, which was a relatively obscure movie, got amazing press and distribution because people started remixing it. And that's actually very, very important, that this remixing, the idea of allowing others to put their fingerprint on your content, is actually part of the marketing chain of the internet. And that's something that the old media doesn't quite understand. And also, a lot of studies, and I'm sure MIT has done one and Harvard has done another one, says that the vast majority of copyright value will be actually consumed in the first 3 years. So that 14 years, in the Victorian age, the length was 14 years, was actually an appropriate amount of time given to content creators. And again, human biology plays a fact. If you hear an idea somebody else says and you implement it, you have no moral qualms about that. Most people don't have any issue by hearing an idea going, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to run with it. If somebody does that to you, you have an idea, if somebody runs with it, you feel like you've lost something. It's called loss aversion, right? And the guy, the non-guy who was heckling us, the troll there, was reacting to his biology of loss aversion, even though it wasn't necessarily his loss, right? It's a community loss identification. So what you see is when B attacks Tumblr, okay, when B attacks Tumblr, and when you guys complain, when Reddit attacks B and things like that, what you're seeing is a community loss aversion identification, right? The idea that this is ours, even though I necessarily didn't participate specifically in the creation of this item, I identify with this community that is saying we want to defend our cultural identity from this. All right, next question. Yes.
Good luck with your company. I'm glad that you're making a lot of money off of other people's hard work.
QQ more.
Go fuck yourself.
All right, yes.
You're all eating this guy's shit. He's making money off of all of your work.
The internet is serious business. All right.
That's not where I work.
We're hardwired to recognize content and not creators. I mean, if you look at
I didn't know it was going to be such a scandalous panel.
music, there's a culture of celebrity. We're very good at recognizing creators. And the difference on the internet is we've got all this stuff that's anonymous. That's number one. And number two is we don't sign our work on the internet most of the time, right? And you clearly understand this because you put like cheeseburger watermarks.
Right.
That's like you're sort of signing. I think that's part of what people are outraged.
Yeah. No, I totally understand.
But there is this like mechanism. I don't know why people don't do it more. I mean, I'm not really sure.
Actually, so the watermark thing came from a very different reason. We had very early on, we had a difficult time paying for our bandwidth. And the philosophical decision was either we can prevent people from top-linking our images, or we can get something out of it because we're hosting the image. So that's actually where the watermarks came on. And we've actually had a very big internal debate about what is it appropriate to actually put on a watermark, what it's not. And we're actually going through and we're going to be changing our system so that it reflects more of, let's pull back on this watermark everything shit, and we can't afford to pay for our bandwidth now. Let's figure out a different way of actually doing that. And the discussion actually led to how do you preserve the connections between different media? And we were talking about the idea of a meme graph. And it's basically a programmatic way of associating one piece of content to another so that the staff who works at Know Your Meme can actually look at it and go, okay, if we trace the meme graph identification all the way through, we can see that this original piece of content came from this obscure source. And we want to be able to actually give context to content where there was none before, and it's probably something that a lot of us will have to get together and say, let's create an open standard where we can adopt this and say, if a piece of content is remixed, we can actually identify the sources, whether there was a watermark or not, whether the link was accurate or not. Because in many cases, the links actually go to the wrong place, right? What they do is they go to the home page, or they go to the person who found it instead of the original source creator, and we're trying to allot in our system, as we go through and redesign, a way to actually thank the person where it came through, and also thank the person who had a hand in the original creation of it. So, but I think there's, the biology of this is actually, it's very clear. People are drawn to other human beings on when you see them. And while there are many of us who will appreciate the content creator, I would actually have to argue that the vast majority of the public do not give a shit. They really care about the person that they see on TV, and that is that person. And it's reality television works because that works. And so it's something that we do have to worry about, whether people in this room can see through that or not. Someone else? Doesn't want to quit. Brad?
So I think in the context of, well, in the absence of copyright mechanism for lots of internet memes and internet media that are original content, that is, I think there is a way of seeing this as like a pyramid model where, there's always that victim mentality, like the guy that was here.
Yeah.
It's always kind of like the content being absorbed upwards, so to speak, from the underground subculture to, I don't know, say like on the Tosh.0 or on TV. But do you think maybe that there is more of a cycle model where it's not really the end of the meme when it goes up there?
Sure.
But it's...
So I got a question to ask me, which is, right now, if you think of the process as content creators, distributors, remixers, and then it ends up in mainstream where somebody puts it on a commercial and then that's the end of it. What you really want to get to is you want more of a system where if you're part of this culture, you really ought to be able to say, you know, I am Wyden Kennedy, we created Old Spice, and we're going to let people play with it. We're going to give the right to you so that you can remix it and create something new. That because we came from this community, that we aren't going to send you a cease and desist when you remix our content. And so that's the kind of cycle that I think we are moving towards, where people who understand the ethos of remixing culture can put their personal aversion to remixing of their own content behind and say, because I remix from others, because I understand that remixing is actually good for society and good for the commons, I'm going to allow other people to do it, whether the copyright laws support that or not. You're next, the first gentleman in the back.
So most content that we've ever created is improv, right? We're just making more things now than we ever have. But we see a bunch of things like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, right? And like, where do you think that sort of remixing really old content that's fallen out of copyright is going to go?
So those things have literally ended up in the public domain, and so there is no copyright to a lot of the classic works. But unfortunately, the biggest gain to be had in the commons does not fall in the classics. That the classics are consumed by a very small percentage of the population. The stuff that's in the commons is the stuff that feels exactly that is on television and the big screen today. That's the kind of stuff that actually has the ability to move culture, right? It is the video of Elvis Presley that we should be able to remix without any repercussions that's going to actually affect how we see popular culture. As much as we'd like to think of what we do here as highbrow in a philosophical and maybe an academic sense, we actually deal with very low-brow mimetic content. It's very low fidelity. It is found images that we remix together. And what we have to do in order for this idea of cultural regeneration to reach masses is we have to make available content that people are used to seeing every day. Or else, if you force people to identify with something that is 150 years old, you're only going to reach a subset of people who understand the context of something that is 150 years old. So while that may work with an academic crowd, it doesn't necessarily work with popular culture. Yeah, back there.
I was going to ask what you make of George Takei and his Facebook dissemination of the Star Trek and the Star Wars memes, which sometimes has himself in it, sometimes totally doesn't. It's like he's brokering between two large groups of highly, they can join together, they can very divisive groups of fandom. Like, what do you make of all that? So I was wondering, how does he possibly get away with doing all that?
Because he's the badass George Takei. George Takei is an amazing guy. He's fucking awesome. So it's like Will Wheaton and well, actually a lot of Star Trek people are pretty awesome. Okay, so whereas George Lucas has been very heavy-handed with Star Wars, and you don't see that with Star Wars because he's been very heavy-handed. Those people, there's actually very positive influence in Hollywood. During the soap opera protests, I ended up talking to this guy who was like the head of one of the guilds, the artistic guilds in Hollywood, and they're like, we do not support soap at all, but we have no influence. We don't have the money to oppose the people who supposedly represent us. And it was very clear that they didn't want to be a part of this machine that kept the copyright access going. And it was very clear that the creative people, the actors, the writers, the videographers, while they were nervous about losing their ability to make a living, they were also very much aware of the potential possibilities of what the future may bring in remixable content. So I think you have people like George Takei and Will Wheaton who are willing to remix and be out there. And I would love to see more of them speak up and say, this is actually a great net positive for future generations. And the more we start to crack down on supposed intellectual property, the worse we will get, and literally we will fall behind in the world. China has virtually no copyright protections of any kind, and I don't think anyone can say, even in a repressive regime, that their culture on the internet is any worse than ours. In fact, their culture is actually far, far more advanced than you would think for a country that is impoverished compared to the United States, because they're able to have no restrictions on the remix of commercial content. Their speech is politically prohibited. However, when it comes to commercial content, it is the Wild West, and they're certainly having a lot of fun. And their internet companies and their media companies are growing at an incredibly fast clip. Yes? You, yes.
Creative Commons, thinking around that as maybe a potential solution for it, but yet it hasn't gone mainstream in a lot of ways. A lot of people, very few content creators, at least on a bigger level, their initial instinct is, let's just license it Creative Commons. That's not the default. The default is, I have copyright, I'm giving something up to license as Creative Commons instead. How can we restructure, as part of the solution, to restructure the thought pattern with the public is, my default is Creative Commons?
Yeah, giving people voluntary control over what isn't copyrightable material creates more confusion than it actually solves. Creative Commons is a fantastic idea, but what it requires is universal application and universal adoption of Creative Commons. Copyrights work because we all agree to abide by the same rules, not because some people abide by the same rules. Copyright will be better when what people write on Tumblr about copyright becomes the norm. I meant no harm. If you want me to take it down, I will. That is actually the norm of society today. And what we've created is a cultural prohibition. The gap between what we believe is how copyright works in the law versus how society sees it and understands it is the gap of cultural prohibition in the United States today. So I don't see them merging that gap. You continue to see copyrights getting enforced and us being bound by treaties like ACTA, where we continue to go down the path of more protection and more draconian problems. And we have a society that doesn't give a fuck about those laws. And so I don't know how we'll ever divide that gap, but I think that it's really important for companies like us and companies like, well, maybe not Facebook, companies like Google, who are willing to stand up and say, guys, we need to stop this madness where society is constantly being constrained by a law that they don't understand or even agree with. Because if you ask the average person, they will tell you that the fine for downloading a song illegally on the internet should be no more than $100, yet people are going to prison. So when you actually look at those gaps, I think there will be a whiplash. I think that there will literally be a point where society says, you know what, this has gone way too far and we can't deal with this anymore, and so we will de facto legalize, we will immunize, we will actually grant amnesty to those of us who believe that copyright should work the way society works. So, yes?
This is more kind of a segue to your previous point about intellectual property rights in the Far East. When you look at companies like Pandora, et cetera, that are kind of reliant upon traditional models of copyright enforcement, these companies are losing massive amounts of money yearly. So do you think the sort of financial, lack of proof of concept financially is going to be a motivation where the music industry is concerned to kind of bring these ideas generally to the space and extend to kind of the television industry, the movie industry, and do you think it's going to come from a very formal source?
Yeah. So the question is, do the losses incurred by Pandora and Spotify and those companies, will they cause basically a seismic shift in the way the music industry understands how the business should operate? The answer to that, I think, is no. And the reason is that Pandora and Spotify are losing money because they're trying to grab market share, not because their business is not profitable. Like I use Spotify, I pay $10 a month for this thing. And if you told me that I would have to pay $15 a month because they can actually be profitable at $15 a month, I don't think I would really make any habitual change in what I do. Like the society and consumers will accept that as a perfectly fine amount of money to pay for unlimited music 24/7 anywhere you are in the world. So I think that when you see models like that appear, where somebody's doing the hard work of crossing the gap between the old world and the new world and figuring out a way to make business models work, the unfortunate reality is that in the Far East and in areas where intellectual property is not as enforced, they run by a different standard in the United States, those countries have the potential of actually leapfrogging the technology and the infrastructure that we've built. And that's actually why you see treaties being enforced by the United States upon other countries. It's not that the United States believe that it is an intellectual property right and we should have fundamentally these things that we believe in and that they should be universal around the world. It's that the developed countries are actually afraid that by not enforcing the same IP constraints upon other nations, that they will leapfrog the advances that we've made here. In other words, it is better for everyone to have one foot chopped off than for everybody to be on both feet. So, yes?
I must admit, I'm kind of a technical first-time visitor to this convention. and I'm listening to you speaking very philosophically about what Cheeseburger, which is essentially a commercial venture, is doing.
Yeah.
Forgive me, but I'm not understanding exactly this great thing that you're achieving by, waving the flag against intellectual property protection. What is it that succinctly you would explain to a Luddite like me that you're accomplishing that is so high and mighty that justifies all of the things that people such as this guy are opposed to?
Sure.
Or their view of what they think you're doing in terms of like the most worst way of being raping. So what is it that you can most succinctly explain that you're doing with your undertaking, other than the money aspect?
Sure. It's not about us, Cheeseburger, the company specifically. What we're actually talking about here is the oncoming wave of a giant cultural shift in the way we consume content and the way we create content. So for the first time in human history, people are more likely to engage with the content that they consume than ever before. And we are a drop in the bucket. I will be lucky if Cheeseburger is a footnote in the history of the cultural shift that's coming. And so what I'm fighting for isn't just for Cheeseburger. What I'm fighting for is the same thing that a lot of us believe in, which is that it is better for people to allow them to participate and remix content and to be a participant instead of just a passive follower. So that people are educated, that people are involved.
So you're advancing human enlightenment.
It's not human enlightenment. It would be going too far as to say that watching a funny caption is human enlightenment. But it is very tightly coupled with happiness. That's the reason why people come to our site.
So that's what
this is the whole crux of it.
But I can sell happiness through porn that I can charge for. I can sell happiness.
Men cannot live on bread alone. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask, maybe it's a little similar, but I wanted to ask about like your thoughts on maybe the Richard Prince case and other higher level copyright federal or court cases, and how that relates to. I guess my concern is if you have this de facto, like let's let people remix because it's the stakes are low. It's if people making YouTube videos, it's fine. Yeah. But how does that impact maybe works of art? Like if you're too high profile, all of a sudden you aren't allowed to have access to the remixing culture because of how things are going to be shown.
So the case that I'll bring up is Andy Bio. Where is he here? Okay. There you are. I'm going to speak on your behalf. Okay. So you don't get in trouble. Andy Bio was sued by the guy who owns the copyright to Miles Davis's cover of Kind of Blue. Beautiful photo, work of art, arguably. Andy remixed it, created a 8-bit version of the album, and it was awesome. And he also created a bitmap version of the photo and used it as the cover. And Andy was sued by the photographer. How old is that photo?
It's a 50-year-old
Okay, 50-year-old album. 50 years old, half a century, an icon that is part of our collective memories. I saw the album cover that Andy made, and I saw the representation, but it was completely transformative to me. Like that's the keyword, transformative. Like it was changed into something that was radically different than the original one, to a point where it added a value entirely of its own. Andy had to settle out of court for a shit ton of money, for making something amazing that had paid homage to the first part of where it existed. And it wasn't because Andy couldn't win the case. I think Andy could have absolutely won the case, but the problem was the cost of fighting that lawsuit would have outweighed the settlement. And that's part of the problem, is that when you don't make remixing culture and copyright culture clear so that the layman can understand it, when somebody says, I'm going to sue you, your answer is, shit, I'm going to sell. Not because you were wrong, but because the cost of the battle is so steep that you are going to have a chilling effect on society. And that's what I'm concerned about. That if we're going to make fair use really prominent, we have to make it really clear so that your average Twitter user can understand it. Yes,
I think we need to start.
Okay.
If we
Yep, we are late.
to
Thank you very much. I'm really